Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Don't Panic, It's Just Data podcast, where we have a weekly conversation with people impacting the enterprise tech landscape. My name is George Firican. I'm a passionate advocate for the importance of data. Today, I'm speaking with Rem Baumann, resident FinOps expert at Vantage, and we're going to be talking about their usage-based reporting. Rem, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, George. Great to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited about this topic as well, because, from what I've been seeing, there are really three options that organizations typically go for when it comes to, hosting their solutions, their services. So you have on-prem, you have on cloud, and then you have some sort of a hybrid setup. And over the past decade, we've really seen that rise in cloud hosting, and, rightfully so. It does come with a lot of benefits, but of course, we always need to be mindful of the cost associated with it. So how has cloud cost management evolved over the past few years, and what are the critical pain points that organizations face today with traditional cost tracking methods?
I mean, as you said, it's changed a lot over the last couple years. And I guess as some background, I've been in the cloud space for a while. I was at AWS for a while before being here at Vantage, which is a startup around cloud cost observability. So I've actually seen quite a bit of change just in how people are using cloud, the importance and the prevalence of that within some of their organizations. Specifically, as cloud has grown, that's really come with a rise in just the complexity of how people are viewing their tech costs. As people probably know, cloud just started off as virtualized servers where you can access and stand those up in a matter of minutes rather than having to provision your own data center. But as cloud's really evolved, now we have a lot of more complex services, things like serverless and containers. And so along with those comes a lot more complex billing models, especially from maybe a perspective of someone that is not technically savvy, someone that is more involved in the monitoring and finance involved with some of your cloud costs. We also have seen, as we start to see more specialized infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, people start to utilize a number of different providers. And so this would be, in addition to the major clouds like AWS, Azure, and Google, some other specialized platforms like maybe Snowflake, Databricks, Datadog. And so it becomes increasingly harder to start to monitor some of those costs across all of those. So a lot more to monitor, a lot more complex billing models. And so that's specifically, I think, where a lot of customers have seen a lot of pain, especially over the last couple of years as that starts to evolve and change.
Right. And what do you think that these pain points are persisting, and, what has changed in how companies approach the cloud cost?
Definitely, yeah. Well, I think that really getting to the bottom question of what are the actual costs of my applications, in a past life that might have been trying to attribute shares of your data center costs to these applications or teams. Now that is now translating it to the many services and many different providers that you might be using across all of your different teams, especially prevalent for the use case where there are multiple providers. Also, very commonly now, you'll see a lot of people that are using shared services. So an example of that might be like a data lake where you have kind of shared assets that are shared amongst multiple teams. How do you divvy up the costs for something like that, as opposed to just having it go to a shared cost center? I think another pain point that is very common, especially for cloud users, is that if you are just straight looking at some of your costs, most customers are just going to see a graph that's going up and to the right. And for maybe someone in an engineering seat, you have a lot of context into why your costs are increasing. But maybe for someone in finance or procurement, it can be very scary to see just a chart that is just continually going up and up and up. And so this is where, as you were alluding to, George, a little bit more about providing context into your costs based on your usage can be very helpful in defining actually what is good costs and what are bad costs. And maybe like an example of that would be, where you're starting to attribute some of your costs to maybe your subscriber base. You would expect that as your subscribers increase maybe 10%, you would expect a 10% increase in costs for cloud. Maybe if you are operating a little bit more efficiently, that is less than 10%, so that your revenue per customer is going up. From a finance perspective, you'd be obviously a little bit more concerned if your subscriber base grows 10%, but your costs go up 50%. So that's some of the context that I think comes along with solving some of the pain points that we were talking about in terms of actually contextualizing your costs.
Right. And I guess the cloud service providers don't really provide all the solutions to be able to monitor these types of costs effectively.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that, what cloud providers do out of the box is that they're giving you some of the insights just of your spend, and their kind of responsibility to their customers is, to give you the visibility into all of the costs, maybe by service and by account. But usually they're going to create something that is going to be a lightweight tool for viewing those costs, just to allow you to do that as easily as possible. And that lacks a lot of the business context that we were talking about. And so this is where those out-of-the-box solutions from these cloud providers maybe is starting to become something that is just not the end solution for a lot of people that are using cloud. And so they'll need to either use some in-house developed solution. Certainly a lot of customers that I've worked with that are very large at scale have built a lot of their own internal BI solutions and automated types of reports that can help with that monitoring. Obviously, that requires a lot of in-house development man hours and manpower, dedicated people. And then maybe you start to use a third-party solution, such as Vantage. When I was at AWS, I worked a lot on a framework called Kudos, which is our open source version of AWS that allows you to do monitoring via their cost and usage report raw data and some BI tools within AWS. So kind of picking your lane of, do you want a third party to manage all this and do the development yourself? Or do you want to bring on some of the responsibility to own and maintain and bring some of those insights for some of your costs? Because as I was saying, it's usually can now provide a lot more flexibility and more reporting power than just some of the out-of-the-box tools from cloud providers.
Right. So, as you're mentioning, really the de facto way of measuring cloud costs is looking at the dollar spend. That's kind of the out-of-the-box features that you're having from the cloud service providers is the easiest thing to measure as well. It's what finance looks at on the billing sheet right away. But what are some of the other ways of tracking your usage at scale for growing companies?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where I think some of the usage-based metrics start to become really prevalent, really start to add some context and understanding to the actual usage that you're having. So kind of the first category of types of ways of measuring that I would categorize would be just usage-based KPIs. And these can be a little bit more technical in nature, but these can be really just driven based on your usage. And so if you use a lot of storage, maybe that's something like what is the percentage of your storage that is in an archival tier of storage? Because typically a lot of the cloud providers will have different tiers of storage that become less and less expensive the less often that you're accessing it. This could also mean what percentage of your virtual machines are running on like a modern generation of machine, especially for customers that we've seen that are in the cloud for a long time. You kind of set and forget some of your old workloads, and after a couple of years, you're running something that is quite out of date and going to be more expensive and less performant. And then another one more from a FinOps perspective maybe is what percentage of your compute usage is covered by some type of commitment-based discount. Especially for heavy cloud users, this is going to be how you save the most money. And so those are some usage-based KPIs that I see that are very common. The second kind of category would be then types of different unit metrics. And these different types of unit metrics can be, again, a little bit more technical in nature. And so, again, using storage as an example, measuring the unit cost of your storage. So maybe this is something that is hovering around maybe a cent or two per gigabyte. Ideally, again, instead of just looking at the amount of data you're storing and the amount that you're spending going up, you want to make sure that the cost that you're spending per gigabyte is either static or going down. Going down would essentially indicate that you're putting a greater percentage of your storage in archive. And especially for someone that has been around for a while as a business, you'd expect that a lot of your data that you are accumulating is not used or needed all the time. You can also do the same for compute unit cost, again, trying to ensure that the amount that you're spending, maybe per instance hour or per vCPU, static or going down. But I think maybe a more helpful metric or something that can extrapolate or contextualize your costs maybe better for someone that's in a non-technical seat would be then tying these to your business. And so this could be maybe a cost per subscriber, a cost per user, putting it really in the context of your business so that then, again, you're assimilating your costs with the actual cost of your business and making sure that that growth is in a good and positive way.
I love those insights, Rem. And especially those business metrics. I think they're very valuable, even for the technical audience that is listening. It's sometimes good to put in their business case to push up to the execs. Can you give us some other practical examples on how companies use these metrics to make more data-driven decisions?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, like these should be used to drive a lot of your business decisions. So again, kind of putting this in the context of your business, I used cost per subscriber a little bit earlier. That should be very front and center if you are deciding on maybe a price per subscriber. You should be very aware of what your cost is per user so that you can make informed decisions about what your end cost is per customer. And if it is something that is over your existing maybe subscriber amount, that's going to mean that you're losing money for every new subscriber that you bring in. And so in terms of data-driven decisions, this is going to really show you where you have to put some of your emphasis on and potentially drive optimization. And this is where some of the KPIs and more technical measures that I was mentioning come in. And so if you know your unit cost maybe for storage or compute, you can create initiatives around those to bring those down that maybe directly tie to your cost per subscriber. And so maybe that's, again, going back to our earlier examples, moving to more modern generations of virtual machines, archiving more of your storage, using those to kind of drive optimization-based initiatives, tie that back to your business, and hopefully use that to increase your revenue.
I mean, I'm sold. From everything that you've mentioned, I can see why we all need this usage-based reporting. From your experience, what you've seen so far, are there any particular industries or types of companies that see the biggest impact from this usage-based reporting? And how can the reporting be customized to fit their unique needs?
Yeah. I mean, really to hit on the latter part of your question is I think it's just important to be customized and really think about this at the business context level because it really can and should apply to any industry. In my past life, when I was at AWS, my customer subset was primarily in the media and entertainment industry. And so a lot of those mature customers would be looking at their costs in terms of their cost per subscriber, their cost per stream, maybe cost per search when you're indexing across, like searching across a streaming platform. So kind of contextualizing a lot of those for that industry. Maybe for some other categories like financial services, very big, you're wanting to look at your cost per transaction. Also have done some work with some automotive customers where they were measuring the cost of producing a vehicle in terms of cloud costs in order to add that to their labor costs and their manufacturing costs. Again, to kind of be able to roll up all of these things within the context of your business. So really fits in for any type of customer, but I think that you really have to think about what is important for your business or your industry and contextualize some of your measurements in that way.
Love it. Now, of course, we want to make sure that our metrics are measurable. I mean, that's part of their definition, to be measurable, but also actionable. How can usage-based reporting help identify cost savings opportunities and support better customization?
Yeah. And maybe to go into some like real world examples for me, again, working very heavily in like the media and entertainment industry, which are very storage heavy. I would very often look at unit costs of storage for some of these customers, especially extrapolating that over time. I was mentioning it, especially for companies like that are ingesting huge amounts of data. You have to be really on top of what you are archiving versus what you are keeping in hot storage and potentially how much you're paying to access all those. So that's a really important metric when I was looking at it with some of my old customers. And so we would very often, for example, when we see increases in that storage unit cost, look for some of the underlying causes of that. And so, for example, one of the companies that I work with, we saw a huge rise in this, and it was because they'd been moving a lot of some of their new content into a storage area that didn't have any type of archiving in it. So just using that little piece of tidbit information and actually kind of pinpointing where that was coming from allows you to identify optimization opportunities, take action. For them alone, it was saving multiple $1 million a year for the scale that they were at. And you can obviously understand the impact that millions of dollars have of their cost to serve and their cost per customer. This was in the middle of them attempting to become more profitable. They were at a point where their cloud costs were greater than their subscription cost. And so this was a part of a huge effort to bring down their total cloud cost by about 20%. So using a combination of those, again, kind of starting with your cost per subscriber, knowing that you need to bring your cost down, identifying costs that may be rising contextually within your business, kind of layering those on top of each other to find optimization opportunities is a great way to do that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great example on how usage-based reporting can help you get to the root cause of some of these issues and then create those efficiencies. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, what advice would you give organizations aiming to align their cloud cost metrics with executive and engineering goals to ensure clear communication and financial transparency?
Again, I think the first thing is to kind of level set, again, and this is really across having a common language between engineering, procurement, finance. Anyone is helping to contextualize the cost within your business and getting to that point where you can all agree on some metrics that are either non-monetary or monetary tangentials to help measure your business. And so this is where a lot of those KPIs that we were discussing come into play. And I would say that the most important thing is to really just ensure that you are aligning that with some of your business goals. And so if you are a profitable business, maybe it's just ensuring that you maintain your cost per customer as you continue to grow, ensuring that, as we were alluding to earlier, like your infrastructure costs are not going up faster than your revenue. That's something that we see very often with people that don't necessarily have direct ties into their costs, where just their cloud costs are growing 40, 50%, and their revenue is only increasing 10% over year. So needing to isolate where those are coming from. And so bringing that back to different unit metrics per application, per team, what is it that are driving costs? Is that users? Is that clicks? Is that total consumption time from your users? Really tying back your costs into the end result for your customers and making sure that you're measuring on that. If you are going for optimization or even just like a long-term monitoring, I think, again, having some of those more technical KPIs that are like your storage unit cost, your compute unit cost, really give you a good pulse on, am I staying consistent in my hygiene with how I use the cloud? And you can even bring in maybe some additional metrics around percent of idle time for some of your resources, really to get a better understanding. And you can essentially layer on more and more technical metrics here of things that you want to monitor. But again, going back to specifically where you need to focus, I would say that's really around having that alignment across all of your teams on what are the metrics that are most important for your business, and then measuring those across all of your teams. And I think kind of on that note, can be very important that you're actually utilizing that metric, because I've seen a lot of teams that will define those KPIs and they say that it's very important, but you kind of set it and forget it and aren't checking on those. So also, particularly when you are especially bringing in people of maybe different domains, engineering and finance, for example, ensuring that you're having that constant communication, maybe weekly or monthly touch bases that I see very frequently for my customers, ensuring that you have that communication and you are actively monitoring those metrics.
Thank you, Rem. Thanks so much for joining us today and sharing these examples, advice, and best practices. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you, George. Great to be here. Thanks for the great questions. And again, thanks for everything.
My pleasure. And thank you to everyone for listening. We hope you took a lot away from today's podcast. For further information on what we've talked about, please head over to vantage.sh. We'll be back next week with another episode in our podcast series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all major platforms and follow the conversation on our socials at EM360Tech on X and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, head over to em360tech.com. Thank you.